What if I told you the story of New York's population isn't what you've been taught? A massive new genetic study has just rewritten the DNA of the Empire State. Literally. We're talking about tens of thousands of New Yorkers, from Manhattan high-rises to upstate farms, whose genes are revealing stunning truths about migration, colonization, and cultural survival. Forget Ellis Island cliches. This study uncovered genetic footprints no history book ever mentioned. From hidden Native American ancestry to unexpected African and Mediterranean roots, New York's population is a human puzzle with pieces scattered across continents. Why New York's DNA is so unique? New York isn't just a city, it's an engine of global migration, churning for over 400 years. From the very beginning, it has pulled in people from every direction. Dutch traders in the 1600s, English colonists, enslaved Africans brought through colonial ports, and successive waves of immigrants from Ireland, Italy, Germany, and Eastern Europe. In the 20th century, Caribbean communities surged into the Bronx and Brooklyn, and more recently, immigrants from West Africa, South Asia, and East Asia added their voices to New York's cultural symphony. This unbroken chain of arrival has left an extraordinary genetic footprint. Indigenous groups like the Lenape, Mohawk, and Seneca were the region's original inhabitants, and their genetic signatures still echo throughout the region. Subsequent migrations layered over these roots, forming a city where every borough holds multitudes. What makes New York's DNA so unique is not just the diversity of its contributors, but the density of interactions. People didn't just arrive, they mixed, married, and rebuilt identities. Unlike many places in the world where ethnic enclaves remained isolated, New York's relentless interconnection helped create new cultural and genetic combinations. The result? A human genome archive unlike any other. A living, evolving storybook written in base pairs. This story isn't just about New York. It's about what happens when humanity collides, coexists, and co-creates. Understanding the city's DNA isn't just a scientific curiosity. It's a window into how history lives on, hidden in our bloodstreams waiting to be discovered, the groundbreaking study. A first-of-its-kind genetic survey led by scientists from Columbia University, NYU, and the Broad Institute has cracked open the human archive of New York City. This wasn't a superficial ancestry check. Researchers collected DNA from over 30,000 New Yorkers, representing every borough, ethnicity, and migration wave, and paired it with immigration records, oral histories, and self-reported heritage. Participants submitted saliva samples that were then sequenced using state-of-the-art genotyping technology. The researchers used complex bioinformatics tools to trace DNA markers down to regional and even village-level precision. Think, not just West African, but Yoruba from Nigeria or Akan from Ghana, not just European, but Galicia in Spain or a specific island in Greece. The results were astonishing. The team didn't just map expected lineages, they discovered deep ancestral threads that defied census data and family lore. Mixed ancestries were more common than previously known, with many participants carrying invisible legacies across continents. What set this study apart was the methodology. By integrating historical documents and first-person narratives with genomic data, it provided a three-dimensional view of New York's human story. It revealed forgotten migrations, invisible lineages, and the profound impact of policies, wars, and social movements on the genetic landscape. This wasn't just academic. It changed the way scientists, historians, and communities think about identity. It gave individuals a clearer mirror. It made history personal. And it proved one thing beyond a doubt. The story of New York is still being written in every cell, every borough, every name. If you have been enjoying so far, hit the subscribe button so you never miss any update. The hidden indigenous legacy. Here's the first major shock from the study. Over 40% of participants had detectable Native American ancestry, even among families with no documented tribal connections. This rewrites assumptions about indigenous survival and influence in the Northeast. Most of this DNA came not from the expected Lenape or Haudenosaunee tribes native to the area, but from tribes across the Great Lakes and Midwest. This suggests that forced relocations, assimilation, and intermarriage left genetic traces long after official records lost track. Some of these lineages bore what scientists call ghost signatures, genetic imprints from tribes that no longer exist or were absorbed centuries ago. Why was this missed for so long? Many indigenous lineages were hidden by systemic erasure, migration, and social survival strategies. Families who feared persecution re-identified as Black, white, or Hispanic across generations. Their DNA, however, carried the truth forward. The presence of this ancestry in unexpected boroughs, like Midwestern tribal markers in Brooklyn and the Bronx, shows the incredible mobility of these communities. Whether through the Great Migration, the military, or marriage, these stories moved with people across time and space. It also highlights a broader truth that New York is not just a destination, but a repository, a place where lost threads of human history converge. And thanks to this study, these threads are finally being rewoven into our collective narrative. African ancestry beyond the slave trade. The story of African ancestry in New York has long been told through the lens of the transatlantic slave trade. And yes, West African roots, Yoruba, Fulani, Akan, Mende are deeply embedded in the city's genetic fabric. But this study revealed a far more intricate tapestry. Markers from East Africa, specifically Somali and Ethiopian populations, appeared in significant numbers, particularly in Harlem and Queens. North African ancestry, including Berber and Arab lineages, surfaced in DNA samples from the Bronx and Long Island. These are not typically associated with the slave trade, so how did they get there? Some arrived via Iberian colonization and Caribbean mixing. Others traced back to Moorish populations, migrating through Europe and into the Americas. Perhaps the most startling revelation? The discovery of East and North African ancestry in families who identified as Italian, Irish, or Jewish, suggesting centuries of intermarriage and cultural fluidity. Additionally, the study unearthed genetic links to early free Black settlements in upstate New York, communities that predate the Emancipation Proclamation. These were likely formed by escaped slaves, freedmen, and their descendants, contributing yet another overlooked chapter to American history. What emerges is a picture of the Black diaspora not as a monolith, but as a galaxy, interconnected, multidirectional, and surprisingly global. This diversity challenges simplistic narratives and calls for a deeper, more inclusive understanding of African identity in the Americas, European ancestry that defies the textbooks. We expect to find Irish, Italian, and Ashkenazi Jewish DNA in New York's population. But this study revealed European ancestries that don't show up in immigration textbooks. Staten Island and parts of Long Island revealed strong Portuguese and Basque signatures, suggesting unrecorded maritime communities or intermarriage with Spanish-speaking populations in the Caribbean. Some Brooklyn neighborhoods, known historically for their Jewish populations, showed unexpected Greek and Balkan DNA. Upstate towns carried significant Scandinavian markers, pointing to 19th century Lutheran migrations from Norway and Sweden, communities often overshadowed by the more visible German influx. Most intriguing, 1/3 of participants carried cryptic European ancestry, lineages that don't correspond with any major documented groups. Some of these may belong to Jewish conversos fleeing the Spanish Inquisition, undocumented seafarers, or forgotten enclaves of Central European migrants. What this tells us is that European ancestry in New York has always been more blended than anyone realized. Behind every white ethnic label lies a patchwork of origins, shaped by hidden migrations, quiet intermarriages, and lost records. This complexity forces a reconsideration of identity categories. It challenges the assumption that ancestry maps neatly onto national origins, and it reinforces the idea that in New York, nothing, not even bloodlines, is ever simple or singular. In a city built on diversity, even the dominant narratives contain multitudes. The DNA proves it. The stories are there, and they're still unfolding under our skin. The Caribbean connection. New York City, long seen as a global crossroads, reveals in its DNA one of the strongest hidden stories, the Caribbean connection. Genetic data unearthed unexpected ancestral links in participants across the 5 boroughs. African American participants often carried Haitian, Jamaican, or Trinidadian DNA signatures, evidence of historical migration patterns influenced by the transatlantic slave trade, Caribbean labor diaspora, and 20th century political upheavals. Puerto Rican individuals showed deep-rooted Taino ancestry, a surprise for many who were told that the indigenous Caribbean populations had been erased. Meanwhile, Dominicans in NYC displayed a complex blend of West African, Iberian, and even Middle Eastern genetics, markers of Spanish colonization, African slavery, and Sephardic Jewish diaspora. What emerges is a picture of the Caribbean as a genetic crossroads and New York as its northern outpost. The Bronx, Brooklyn, and parts of Queens bear this legacy in living genomes. Caribbean identity, often defined culturally, now finds affirmation at the molecular level. This revelation isn't just scientific, it's emotional. Many participants felt a new pride in their ancestral roots and a deeper understanding of how migration shaped not only family stories, but the fabric of New York itself. The Caribbean connection challenges traditional categories and affirms that identity is layered, historical, and resilient. By uncovering these links, the study reshapes how we view both Caribbean and New York histories, not as separate narratives, but as intertwined destinies written in DNA, Jewish ancestry, Ashkenazi, and beyond. The study provided unprecedented access to Jewish populations across NYC and uncovered a wealth of hidden heritage. Ashkenazi Jewish participants showed clear genetic bottlenecks stemming from historical trauma. Pogroms in Eastern Europe and the Holocaust had left imprints in the form of reduced genetic diversity and unique hereditary markers. These traces weren't just biological, they were living echoes of survival. In Queens and the Bronx, Sephardic and Mizrahi Jewish ancestry surfaced unexpectedly. Some individuals identifying as Latino or Arab carried partial Jewish DNA, tracing back to the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492. These remnants had survived through centuries of assimilation, forced conversion, and migration. What was most compelling was how distinct Jewish markers allowed researchers to cross-validate timelines and map migrations across continents and centuries. From Poland to Morocco to Brooklyn, Jewish ancestry served as a genetic bridge through global diasporas. This genetic evidence added depth to New York's Jewish identity. It showed not only continuity, but complexity, multiple origins, intermingling lineages, and hidden histories. Participants reported feeling both affirmed and astonished. Some discovered connections to Jewish ancestry for the first time, while others saw their family legends scientifically validated. The study reframes Jewish identity not as a monolith, but as a mosaic, genetically and culturally diverse, yet uniquely preserved. In New York City, this diversity is spatially mapped across neighborhoods and genetically mapped across chromosomes. It proves once again, New York isn't just a city of immigrants. It's a city where ancient lineages find new life, the urban genetic map. Using thousands of samples, researchers crafted a literal genetic map of New York City, one of the most detailed ever attempted for an urban environment. What they found was stunning in both its complexity and clarity. Neighborhoods long known for cultural identities also bore distinct genetic signatures, confirming and complicating existing narratives. In Harlem, Deep African roots intertwined with Caribbean overlays revealed a layered Black heritage shaped by both the Great Migration and post-colonial Caribbean arrivals. The Lower East Side, a historically immigrant-rich zone, showed DNA threads from Jewish, Italian, and Chinese communities, tracing waves of settlement from the 19th century onward. Queens stood out as perhaps the most genetically diverse borough on Earth. Over 190 ancestry groups were detected in one borough alone. South Asian, East Asian, Latin American, African, and Middle Eastern origins converged in dense, overlapping neighborhoods, each contributing to the borough's ever-shifting genetic identity. Upstate New York told a different story of isolation and stability. Irish, German, and Mohawk. Native American lineages were clearer and less mixed. Meanwhile, the Bronx and Brooklyn defied easy categorization. These were convergence zones, genetic mosaics of global migration patterns with no dominant ancestry. This map isn't just data, it's a living document of who lives where, why, and how their history shapes their biology. It will serve as a model for future urban genetic research and may redefine how we think of diversity in physical space and human DNA. What do you think? How powerful the urban genetic map can be for our future research? Let us know in the comments. Genetic time capsules. Beyond identifying ancestry, the study revealed temporal layers embedded in DNA, genetic time capsules that reflected pivotal historical events. Depression-era bottlenecks, for example, created noticeable genetic constriction in certain communities, especially among Jewish and Southern European populations. These periods of economic hardship and low birth rates left visible fingerprints. World War II-era migrations and refugee influxes introduced new genetic threads, from Eastern European Jews fleeing the Holocaust to Italians and Germans escaping post-war devastation. These arrivals diversified NYC's gene pool and left lasting imprints in boroughs like Brooklyn and Staten Island. The Great Migration from the South introduced millions of African Americans to northern cities, reshaping Harlem and parts of the Bronx. Their southern U.S. genetic profiles carried both African and European components, which researchers used to track intra-American migration flows. Even modern events left marks. Post-9/11 resettlements and demographic shifts caused by gentrification have begun to alter neighborhood-level genetic compositions. Researchers predict that COVID-era relocations, disruptions, and diasporas will also become visible in the DNA of future generations. This discovery turns human DNA into a historical record. It tells stories not just of where people came from, but when and under what circumstances. These time capsules elevate genetics from science to storytelling, a powerful tool for understanding crisis, resilience, and change. NYC becomes not just a map of ancestries, but a timeline of human experience written in flesh and blood. Culture versus genetics in NYC. One of the most profound findings from the study was the tension and harmony between cultural identity and genetic ancestry. Many participants arrived with strong notions of who they were based on family lore, national pride, or lived experience. Yet the DNA often complicated these stories. Some people who identified as Irish or Italian discovered significant Jewish, North African, or West African ancestry. Others with proud Caribbean or Dominican identities found themselves connected to Iberian, Middle Eastern, or even indigenous American lineages. For Jewish participants, the split between Ashkenazi, Sephardic, and Mizrahi DNA reinforced that Judaism is both a faith and a deeply varied ethnic heritage. What emerged was a picture of NYC as a city of both continuity and rediscovery. Indigenous and African lineages, often hidden through centuries of oppression and silence, re-emerged through science. For many, the results were healing, offering a chance to reclaim erased identities or affirm whispered family legends. The researchers were clear: genetics doesn't define identity, it adds to it. Cultural belonging is chosen and lived. DNA simply enriches that story. In New York City, where identities are fiercely held and fluidly lived, this message resonated deeply. People aren't their genomes, but their genomes carry stories. In a city built on stories, that revelation matters. It challenges what we think we know, and it validates what we've always felt. We are more connected, more complex, and more human than we imagined. What this changes. The implications of this study stretch far beyond New York's borders. Textbooks will need to be rewritten, especially those dealing with colonial America, immigration, and indigenous presence. Traditional migration narratives, often framed as simplistic or linear, must now incorporate complex genetic evidence that tells a deeper story. For indigenous communities, these findings may support land and identity claims. Genetic proof of continuous presence in the Americas could become part of legal and political arguments. Similarly, communities descended from enslaved Africans or displaced Jews may use this data to recover lost histories and assert cultural rights. For scientists, the findings challenge long-standing assumptions about genetic purity, racial categories, and isolated populations. The study confirms that no group is untouched by migration and mixture. Genetics doesn't uphold boundaries, it breaks them. For New Yorkers, it affirms something they've always known intuitively. The city is a true melting pot. But this study reveals that melting started much earlier and ran much deeper than previously understood. DNA confirms that the city's diversity isn't just cultural or recent, it's historical and embedded in every cell. This knowledge could shift how we think about identity, education, healthcare, and even urban planning. It encourages inclusivity, curiosity, and empathy. And above all, it reminds us that history lives not just in books or buildings, but in our bodies. What's next? This study was just the beginning. Phase 2 is already underway, promising deeper dives into underrepresented communities such as Yemenis in Brooklyn, Bangladeshis in Queens, and Afro-Caribbean enclaves in the Bronx. By expanding the sampling base, researchers hope to uncover even more nuanced stories of migration and adaptation. Another frontier is ancient DNA. Researchers plan to analyze remains from historical cemeteries, burial sites, and archaeological digs across the city. This work could bridge modern genetic profiles with centuries-old inhabitants, revealing continuity, displacement, or replacement across time. Additionally, new projects will focus on how gentrification affects genetic continuity. Do newer populations displace old ones genetically, or do they blend? What happens to cultural heritage when neighborhoods transform? Comparative research is also in the works. Similar urban studies will be conducted in cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and Miami to see if New York's patterns hold true elsewhere or are uniquely amplified by its density and history. Ultimately, the goal is not just to map where we came from, but where we're going. The intersection of genetics, sociology, and urban studies could help build more inclusive narratives and policies, because understanding our shared past might just be the key to building a better future. Which of these revelations surprised you the most? Have you ever uncovered something unexpected in your own DNA story? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your journey. And if you're passionate about science that rewrites history and reshapes identity, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's so much more to discover, and we're just getting started.